you very much for introducing me. I'm not going to stand next to the lectern because you won't be able to see me. So I'm going to stand here. And firstly, thank you for inviting me to come to speak and come travel over the Pennines from Sheffield. I'd say that this part of the country is my favourite part in the whole of the world, and I love coming to the Lake District. So what a fantastic place to spend the weekend. So my name's Esther. I'm a doctor and I work at the Sheffield M&D Care Centre. And the Sheffield M&D Care Centre was originally set up by Dame Professor Shaw, who has spoken, I imagine, at some of these conferences before. And she's a wonderful mentor for people like myself. And she initially set up Citran, a research institute, with the idea to bring basic scientists like Nick and clinicians like me, because I'm not as clever as Nick, I don't do basic science, I do clinical work. But she wanted to bring us all together in one fantastic building to try and find the cure for M&D. And actually it's grown and expanded ever since we started. And actually now what we're doing, not only is we're bringing basic scientists, clinicians like me, but we're also welcoming people like yourselves who have experience, real life experience living with the disease into our research unit. And actually I think that's been the really exciting thing for me and why I love working with this disease. So the future is bright, but I thought because I was talking at the MNDA, I'm going to call it the future is orange. And actually every single research that I'm going to talk to you about today has some support either from the MNDA and from people like yourself, and for which I'm very grateful. And I'm going to talk to you about how people like you are changing the way that we do M&D research. So this is what medicine used to be like, and I'm calling it medicine, not healthcare. There doesn't seem to be much care. So this is a whole bunch of doctors. This is Sharko, who is a very famous neurologist. And the few things you might notice, they're all men, obviously, no women in the room, no women doctors. They're obviously French, because they've got amazing beards and moustaches, haven't they? And the thing is that, you know, what's actually going on here? This lady's got hysteria, and they're all studying around and looking at her, but they're not really very interested in her and what she's got to say. And if they asked her, they'd probably find that rather than hysteria being a disease of the brain, they would have found out quite quickly that it was a disease of psychology, and that would have made a huge difference to her. And in fact, you notice there's only one person in the room interested in her. It's obviously the nurse there, the lady in the corner. Fortunately, medicine is completely different now. And medicine really is a conversation between experts, because whilst I'm an expert on medicine and motor neuron disease, and Nick might be an expert in basic science motor neuron disease, it's the patient that's the expert in themselves and how they live with the condition and what they experience, and the people around them are experts in living with motor neuron disease. So really, medicine has changed. And what that's led to is this sort of feeling of, you know, no decision about me should be made without me. So, and this has really, I think, you know, changed medicine over the last 20 years. And now it's starting to change research, and definitely for the better. So I'm going to talk to you about a few of these sort of conveyor belt research things that we've been doing in Citran. And I'm going to start with one that's actually just popped off the end and is now something that's going to change patient care. And then I'm going to go backwards to some ones that are perhaps earlier on that patient journey, on the conveyor belt journey. So this is the very first UK or worldwide patient and public involvement group. So we have a fantastic bunch of people that come to Citran to tell us what we should be doing in research. There's patients, there's carers, there's association visitors, the regional care advisor comes, and so we invite clinicians and scientists to talk to us. And in fact, they say to you, the only thing you need to know to come to this group is to know about M&D. And they told us what we need to do for research. And one of the first things they talked about is neck weakness. Now, I'm not going to talk a huge amount about this because you've probably heard a bit about it before, but I'll just go briefly over it just to tell you about the new things now. So as many of you can appreciate, neck weakness is a real problem in M&D. This lady's trying to talk to us. It's very uncomfortable. She can't communicate. She can't eat and drink. And these are the current solutions. You've got this sort of soft thing that goes around the neck and kind of protects the neck, but provides absolutely no support. We found this sort of Doctor Who-like thing that sort of surrounds the neck and sort of sticks up, and it looks like it's trying to eat her, really. It's no good. And then, you know, if you fall off your bike, like I do a lot, you might end up with one of these around your neck, and that's the paramedic trying to stop you from moving your neck, which is incredibly uncomfortable, and the last thing you really want to do is to not be able to move at all. So those of you who work in this field will know most of these go in the bin, and they're no use. So we went back to our patients and their carers, and we worked with fashion designers and engineers, and we tried all sorts of different collars. So this is the puller neck, kind of pulls back at the back there like that. Sensible, but didn't really work. This is my favourite, the magnetatron. So it's got magnets around the back here, and it repels things from your head, and you can kind of sort of walk around like you're levitated in space. Not very practical. And then we did lots of workshops, and people tried things, and they eventually came up with this idea of a sort of herringbone effect, where you have a kind of a smooth collar, and then you get supports that can be added depending on how much support you need, from a little bit of support all the way through to a lot of support, like that stiff collar. And this is what our sort of prototype looked like, and we've been out to a company. And I can actually say now that from Monday last week, it got launched, and this is now available for people to buy. And having chatted to Pauline, she understands that they're going to be looking to get it through the NHS as available as well. So I said I wasn't going to run around, and I'm not going to. So it comes in a box like this. And this is the collar itself. And rather than me I tried to do a demonstration, it didn't work. I'm not very good at putting them on myself, but I'm going to be around all day, so if people want to come and have a look at it and feel and test it, and it'll be £150 for 2 collars, one to wash and one to wear, which is very affordable, and I think they're going to be available through the website, so people who, for whatever reason, perhaps outside of the UK, or they don't want to wait for their NHS centre to get them, bear with them. I suspect they're going to be inundated, but they may be able to, they can buy them through the website as well. So, I mean, without the patients telling us this is what we wanted and working with us, this would have never happened. And I should also say, without the MNDA support, who paid for the evaluation of this product, this would never have happened. So I'm around at lunchtime. Feel free to come and have a look at that. I should just say this is Lynn, one of our patients, trying it out. She wore hers on her 70th birthday, and doesn't she look glamorous? So it's a really lovely thing to wear. It's not a horrible NHS kind of collar. So I'm going to talk to you now a little bit more about what we do in Citran, which is where we translate research, boring papers, those graphs of all those papers, I can't read them all, most of them are boring, into real-life solutions, things that are going to really make a difference to people. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about nutrition. Because doctors, we noticed that people who are thin had more problems with their MND than people who are overweight. So we thought there was something going on there about nutrition. And nutrition is also important to our patients. About half of people are taking supplements. And often people say to me, you know, what can I do? What can I do with my diet to help me? And you might have heard about before, this is Harris, one of our researchers, and this was an MNDA-funded study, and he looked at what happened to people who'd had feeding tubes fitted, what happened in the 3 months after they had the feeding tube fitted. And what they found is that people who hadn't lost 10% of their body weight lived longer than people who'd lost 10% of their body weight or more. And what we concluded from that is feeding tubes need to be put in early. Because once the weight loss has happened, it tends to be irreversible. And for people that have lost the most weight, they have the most exposure to risk of the procedure. And we also found that the different ways of having them put in are broadly similar. So it doesn't matter where you are in the country, you should get a good, safe way of having a tube fitted. And just in case you don't know what a feeding tube is, it's a small, tiny little plastic tube inserted into the stomach. And that's essentially the information that people used to get when they were thinking about a gastrostomy. And that's a problem, really. Because really people were a bit in the dark about what actually happened. What was actually going to happen to me when I had my feeding tube? What are my options? Is it something that I actually want? And a lot of people were putting it off, not really knowing what was going on. The other thing about a feeding tube is that food is a really social part of our lives. So it's really, you know, every party you go to has food available. And people were saying, well, I don't want to give up eating. Can I eat with my feeding tube in? And in fact, Terry, one of our stars of the celebrities in our website, said, I've got to get this right. I had to put my meat and potato. He thought he had to put his meat and potatoes into his tube. And so this is what we came up with. And we worked with patients, or I'm going to call them celebrities, and their carers and families. And they really told us what to do here. This wasn't us, this was them. And they told us what they wanted to know, which was about thinking about having a tube, getting it fitted, the choices around having a tube, living with the tube, and then looking after someone with the tube. And I'm just going to show you a quick video of what this website's about. Right. Now, how do I play?
Hello, I'm Terry, and this is the tube that I live with.
Hi, I'm Jason, and this is my tube. I've never seen a tube in anyone or a tube itself before I'd agreed to have one. And once I'd agreed to have one, the nurse actually showed me a tube, you know, a new one out of the stomach, showed me how the balloon worked and what have you. So I knew what was going to get put inside, you know, before I had it done. But prior to agreeing to it, I'd never seen a tube at all.
You know, people talk about a peg, pig or rig, but you've no idea what it is, you've no idea what it's going to look like, you've no idea how it's going to be inserted, and I think ideally it would be better for you to be able to see these things, or, you know, either out of the body or see another patient with them in, before you make the decision to have one.
I never had chance to talk to an actual person living with a peg, and this is why I agreed to take part. If only they would have had this video before I had my tube, I would have definitely thought, well, it's a lot of advantages.
You may have been told that you may need a feeding tube and asking yourself, why do I need one and what do I want to know about it? So that may be how is it going to feel to have the tube placed, how will it feel having the tube in your stomach, I guess, how will you feel afterwards, how long might you be in hospital for, and then some information about how you may use that tube to feed through it, and also help maybe to decide whether it is right for you to have that tube placed. A feeding tube can be also known as a peg, a rig, a pig, or a gastrostomy tube, is a piece of plastic tubing that is usually placed near the centre of the abdomen, and a tube that comes out of the abdomen, so that you can then feed or give water or your medications via it if you're not able to swallow your food, water or medications as well as you were before. And the timing of it is something that you'll need to discuss between you and your family, but between you and your clinical teams, what are the pros and the cons about having it done earlier or maybe waiting till later.
Introduction to the MyTube video, and I think what you can see from that is, and what we learned when we did some of the research around this, is people can, like me as a doctor, can tell you what a feeding tube is, but not what it's like, how you're going to live with it. And actually, you know, people kind of listen to doctors and they take some advice, but listening to someone who's really had one is so much more powerful for people, and it's so much more important. And they were the ones that told us exactly what to do, but also the website's got, you know, people like Sean, a dietitian, it's got backed up by research, and so people know when they go on this website that the information that they get is not just relevant, but also reliable and safe, and it comes from doctors and researchers. And I think also the wonderful thing about this tube is the fantastic celebrities that we had who work with us, because their stories are just wonderful. And if you know, I love living in Yorkshire, and we've got some, you know, fantastic. You already saw some of the Yorkshire people on that, and we've got Jason and Liz, who really showed that you can continue to live a fantastic life. You can be glamorous like Liz in her high heels, and you can also involve your children in this. And so this video was titled Child's Play, just about how easy it was to get the hang of it and to incorporate it in your daily life. And then my very favourite video, which I would recommend that you have a look at, is about Terry. So that is a sheep. So Rose, Terry's wife, was a bit sick of mowing the lawn, so she bought a sheep. And this is all in the videos. And so these are real life stories. We're not, you know, we've not got actors in to voice these. These are really fantastic stories. And this video is, I should say, it's available. It's free to use. Anyone can use it throughout the world. And after we launched it, we got a little bit of feedback. And one patient said to us, you know, I was really dreading having my procedure done. And then I went and looked at just a few of the videos, and I can say that I've been really reassured by what I've found out. And so please go and have a look on it. And if you're a professional or a volunteer, there's the language that people use in the videos is really helpful for people like us to explain to people what's going to happen. And if you're not sure about having a tube, have a look on and see for yourself. And what's the future of nutrition? And I think it's just important to talk to you about a few of the little things, the bigger projects that are going to come out of this research. Firstly, there's an MNDA-sponsored project called Post-Gas, which is looking at what's going to happen to people in the longer months after they have their feeding tube put in. And then an even bigger, huge project sponsored by the NIHR is going to look at whether some sort of dietary intervention started early in the disease could change the course of the disease itself. And that's a really exciting project. Some other future work involving patients you might have heard, we've got a sister site called niv.mymnd.org.uk, which does the same thing for NIV. But we learned so much from the MyTube project that we're going to go back and revamp this website. But again, it does the same sort of thing, talking about the experiences of people using non-invasive ventilation and breathing machines. And again, that's been supported by the motor neuron disease. And I added this slide yesterday because it's quite exciting. This is my new project that's starting as of tomorrow. No one's heard about this before. It's been very hush-hush until we signed the contract. I've got a big project sponsored by the NIHR that's going, and supported by the MNDA, that's going to look at how we can help people use their breathing machines better. So what are we currently doing? What the evidence is there? What are people doing around the country and how are they doing it differently, and where are the best practices? How can we share that? And then how can we help the clinicians to help the patients use their NIV more effectively? My hope is that that's going to change the way that people can access NIV. And so if you're a clinician, you might be hearing from me in the future. So I'm just going to talk to you now about MND Care in 2027, because this is a project that I've been doing as part of my PhD. And here are some of the challenges of MND Care, which we've already really touched on today. So there is going to be increasing service needs because people are going to be living longer with MND, not just because of NIV and perhaps tracheostomy and better care, but I expect there are going to be disease-modifying therapies that come out soon. The future is bright from that point of view too. Also, because we're an ageing population, there's going to be more people out there needing our help. And we are in a resource-scarce time, so we're going to be having to think about how efficient we can be. And everyone needs the specialist care that we're talking about today, because if you have specialist care, you live longer, you probably have a better quality of life, you also get better access to these aids and appliances that help you live, and the proven therapies like non-invasive ventilation and riluzole. But access to that service is difficult, and you'll know, if you have to travel from Cockermouth to come to your M&D care centre in, Newcastle or Preston, that's a real challenge for a lot of people. And the local services are good, but they cannot bring that kind of whole kind of MDT care directly to your doorstep quite just yet. And so we thought, well, could we do things a little bit differently? And that's just to sort of remind you, if you live in one of those areas, North Wales or, the islands of Skye, most of those people will probably only come to an MND care centre once, and then they won't be able to travel there again. It's a really big thing for people. And this is where we live in Sheffield, and we thought we could do things differently there, because we've got some lovely areas, rural, fantastic, beautiful areas. We've got a lot of industrial, urban areas with a lot of deprivation as well. So there's a really big sort of broad challenge that we face. But even in our area, which I think is quite a small catchment area, we've got people travelling from East Yorkshire on the train that takes 3 hours each way. And actually, even getting from, 2 doors down the road to our care centre can be a real challenge for a lot of people. But, we thought we'd actually start to use some of the things that are available out there, because digital care is now really improving. We've got very good internet and digital facilities in the UK. You might not agree with me if you live right out in the middle of the hills somewhere, but the vast majority of people can get some access to the internet. This idea of digital first, the government is pushing using technology so we can be more coordinated and we can get things down on in the computer rather than on paper. So we can coordinate our health services. But even really simple things like email and WhatsApp, how can we use them a bit better to help our patients? And then there's these things like telehealth and telemedicine that I'm going to talk a bit more about. So firstly, telemedicine. So this is an idea that you can essentially sit at home and you can talk to your doctor or care advisor or nurse via Skype or through the internet. And we already do use a little bit of telemedicine. So this is in Sheffield. This is Keith, one of our stroke nurses. And if you came into Sheffield and you had a stroke in the middle of the night, Keith would rush around with his trolley like this. And out on the other side of that screen would appear a consultant. Hopefully they'll have got dressed at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're not in their nightie. But if either way, they can assess you, they can diagnose you, and they can start clot-busting treatment to treat your stroke. Otherwise, they'd have had to have got in their car and travelled to the hospital, and they'd only be able to provide it for Sheffield, whereas what we can do is provide the whole of South Yorkshire now with stroke services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So telemedicine can really work. And actually, Airedale are already ahead of us. So Airedale is an MND care centre that supplies the whole of sort of the Yorkshire Dales, which is a real challenge for people to come to clinic. And they're already using telemedicine to help some of their patients. And there is some research on telemedicine, not a lot, but what it'll tell you is that it's probably safe and it's probably feasible. It's good because it's accessible to people who have to travel, and it's cheap because you just use, your handheld phone and all that sort of thing, and it's efficient for patients. And when I did my PhD, I asked people what they thought about these sorts of things. Sorry, some of them have just missed off the slide where I squeezed it on. But I asked people what they thought about using technology to access their care centre. And the sort of standard things like email and telephone, people were quite supportive of. The sort of text and video were a little bit more uncertain. But there were some positive comments coming out. It's the best thing in the NHS for years. And then I asked them, well, what about if you use this as an alternative to clinic, either if you couldn't travel or you didn't want to travel? And people were a little bit less certain about that, and people made a very good point that if they had a choice, they'd rather speak to someone in person. And obviously, if you've got speech problems or you can't type very quickly, there's some limits there. So it's not all as straightforward as you might think. There are some other downsides to telemedicine. The way that you train as a doctor or a nurse is to see the patient in person, and you examine them and you talk to them and you touch them, and that's a kind of real way of learning. Telemedicine is quite a different way, and it's a bit challenging for people. And this nurse from Airedale sort of made that point. She's a nurse of a certain age, maybe a little bit older, maybe not so used to technology, and things have had to change. The way she's worked has had to change. But I think what's really important is that she saw how the patients really loved using telemedicine, and that's really inspired her and driven her on to use the system and make it work. There's obviously, you can't examine people using telemedicine, so we need to think of better ways to do the examination in someone's home, and that's possible. It is a bit resource intensive because it's still involving the person doing the video conferencing. Someone's got to phone up and check that the internet's working and the technology's okay. And obviously with the whole kind of data protection and Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, there's this worry about confidentiality, which can be overcome. And it's accessible, as I say, for some people, but what we really want is to make sure everyone can access these sorts of services. So what I was looking into in my PhD was telehealth, and telehealth's a little bit different. So what telehealth we thought could do was provide a communication link using the internet that could provide some monitoring, so we could monitor people more frequently as we liked, rather than just seeing someone once every 3 months and finding out things had changed. We thought we could talk more with people, we could give them some education, and we could encourage them to do some self-management. And again, we had support from the MNDA for this, but we also got our patients and carers to come in to try out some of these devices and tell us what they wanted and how it was going to work. So again, this was really driven by patients and their carers. So this is how telemedicine works. So you sit at home with your iPad or your laptop or whatever, and you fill in some questionnaires, and in return you get some education back. It goes into the internet, and our MND nurse looks at it, and if there's a problem, it flags up to her. There's a problem I don't know, you may have fallen, and then the nurse can pick up the phone to the physiotherapist, or she can call you, are you okay, do you need some help, and take it from there. And these are the sorts of things we asked about. So some were sort of function things like the ALS-FRS, which is a score of your physical disability. We had things like weight and balance. We had a lot of symptoms, and we asked the carers how well were they, how were they feeling, and what the problems that they were having. And this is what it looks like. It's quite easy to use. We got the patients to tell the technology developers how to sort of lay out the settings so that it was okay for you to use if you had problems with your hands or you got very fatigued. And you also got a little bit of information depending on the sorts of questions that you answered. Just giving you information about why we were asking the question or what you could do if there was a problem. And just to give you an example, this was a patient who his function is along the top in a graph, and along the bottom is the carer strain score. And actually, as you'll see, that the carer strain score started to go up before the patient's function started to go down on this scale. And actually what that might suggest is that if we'd have sort of noticed earlier on, we could have gone in to help. What's going on? Is there a problem? How can we help? Before the patient really struggled with whatever it was, their mobility or their swallowing. And so we went and asked our patients what they thought of it. And they said it was very acceptable, it's dead easy to use, it literally took 5 minutes. About 85% of them would recommend the TIM, so the telehealth TIM, to another patient, and 95% would use the TIM if they couldn't travel to clinic. And the staff said, yeah, it was easy to use, it was accurate, and it gave a useful picture of the patient and their carer. And it could enable them to make decisions about the patient without them having to be in front of them. And we thought, well, how could it be valuable? And what the patients were saying, it was a really useful link to the specialist team. Often when you're diagnosed, particularly in those first few months where you may not see a lot of people, you really want that connection. So someone's taking an interest, someone's wanting to know, and you don't feel so isolated. And for the carers and for patients as well, a lot of the time when they were first diagnosed, they thought, oh gosh, I'm going to get terribly disabled really quickly. And actually they were quite reassured when they were doing their questions that things hadn't changed very much. And that was nice for them to know, and it was positive. And it made them a bit more aware of the disease, particularly the weight, because people felt that that's something, again, that they could do something about. So they were all busy weighing themselves and reporting that back. And we thought, well, how else could we use it? Could it be an extra to clinic, or maybe an alternative to coming to clinic? And one of the patients said, well, you know, you already know before I turn up what I'm going to be like, and that's really helpful for the nurses because they can, if I don't know, walking's becoming a problem, they might get the physio to see them when they come to the next appointment. So that sort of preparation. You could get some of it done at home, so you don't have to spend a long time in clinic. So get some of your weights or measurements done before you attend. But, you know, how are we actually going to use that is going to really depend on the patient and their circumstances. So one of the patients was saying, well, do I have to come to clinic now? I filled this in. You know, I'm quite happy if you just leave me alone. You can stretch out your appointments. As long as I can get in contact with you and I know that you're in contact with me, you know, you could just leave me and, you know, maybe have a few more holidays and not have to waste time coming to a hospital. And some of the other patients were saying, well, no, I still want to come very regularly because it's really nice to touch base with you guys. So it's going to depend on the patient themselves and what they want. It's not a kind of rigid, you know, inflexible system. And just to give you an example of where I think that the telehealth did help in one of our patients. So the nurse was log in and they'd see something a little bit like this. I've kind of cut and pasted bits of it from the screen. And in the top, they had the flags, and the flags are the things that tell the nurse there's a problem. And the second line down is a lot of reds and ambers, and that's what we call the bulbar function, so the swallowing difficulties. And this person had some problems with his swallowing. And then underneath it, he had his weight. And we noticed that his weight was going down, and his swallowing kept on alerting. And we weren't, you know, we're thinking something needs to be done here. So rather than waiting till they came to clinic for it to be a surprise, we contacted the patient. And he was still struggling with the diagnosis, I think, at this point. And he really needed to have support options. And also for him, I think it was helpful for him to see the graphs, see his weight. And for him, it helped him make that decision that he was going to opt for the feeding tube. You know, now we could have also given him the MyTube website to look at before he came to clinic. So all of these things could help him prepare to make the right choice at the right time for him. And what about carers? Well, there was loads of interest in the carers. They were really surprised that we were interested in their well-being, because often they take a bit of a back seat in terms of care. They really liked that they could voice their concerns away from the patient, but not have to actually leave the house or give up on any caring duties, just to have that little bit of time every week to think about their own well-being. And I think that's going to be really key in the future, about thinking about how carers are supported. You know, it's all very well saying, well, you can come to see me in my psychology service, but it's an hour's drive away. Well, they say, well, I can't leave my loved one at home. Let's think of a way of doing it differently for carers. So I think that was really important, and we really did discover some problems with carers that we'd have otherwise never known about if we'd just waited for them to come to clinic. So what did the nurse say? The nurse was using it, and she gave us lots of interesting feedback. She thought she could prepare for the clinic better. She kind of she sort of had a bit of an idea about what was going on. Some people would look over her shoulder occasionally. Are they using their breathing machine? Oh yeah, they are. That's good. And there were a few problems with it, though, because these digital technologies, as you know, are not always straightforward. And if we were still using like Windows 1.0 now, can you imagine what Windows 1.0 is compared to Windows 10? This is early days. So she was getting a lot of flags, because there are a lot of problems in MND, some of which you can't always solve. So problems with swallowing and sometimes falling. But also what that was perhaps about is allowing the nurses to rethink what's important to the patient. Because if falls are important to the patient, then that needs to be acknowledged, and that needs to have something done about it. And I think that was another important message that came out of the research that we did. She also said how important it was that she knew the patients. So I don't think this is something that you can have completely separate from coming to clinic and that personal relationship you have with that care coordinator. So there were some challenges. So we talked about all the flags and also interaction, because acknowledgement of those problems is really important. And so if you feed back to the patient, you say, pick the phone up and you say, oh, I saw you were falling last week, is there anything I can do? Even if nothing can be or nothing needs to be done at that point, that acknowledgement, that providing a bit of support is really important. And if you don't provide that feedback, they get disheartened. You know, this person said, it's like all surveys, they say, your opinion is important. And you say something absolutely and no one comes back to you, and you think, well, how important really was that to that person? So that's going to be one of the challenges of the telehealth that we've got going forward. So what are the next steps? Well, we'd like to use the telehealth more widely. And I'd like to combine it with telemedicine, so you can pick and choose whatever works for you best wherever you live. But as you probably realise today, services are very different. We have a kind of very traditional model of care in our centre in Sheffield, with the kind of the doctor and the MDT, and it's all in the hospital. But other places have networks, or we have people like we heard earlier on who go from the hospice, but their car is their clinic really. So how are they going to manage that? And I don't want to tell people how to use these things. I want people to tell me what they want out of their service. And I think it's going to be really important that we do these things to make sure that everyone gets a good service, not just those that, are able to fight the hardest. And you mentioned before, I can't remember your name, the gentleman who talked about fundraising, and you said, your friend had lots of people around him, but you recognise that not everyone has that to fight for them, and that's really important. And that's, kind of what I want to do, is make sure that everyone gets a really good standard of care. And finally, continuing and embracing and adapting to new technology. Since I started this project, everything's changed. iPhones are different. People will probably, I think some of these patients who were in their 70s and 80s were using Skype to speak to their relatives in Australia already before I'd even turned up. That's fantastic. And using those new technologies to the best of their advantage is going to be key to this. So my idea being, we don't want to build an empire here, but I could potentially look after patients just in Yorkshire. Or maybe I could have some input into people in London, Scotland. Now, I didn't know where you were from. I could even input into people into Australia. Now, again, I'm not going to empire build, because actually everyone's going to use it really differently. But My aim is to have a system that you can pick and choose the bits that you find useful for the patients that want to use it, and to make care a little bit more equitable. So in summary, thank you for all listening for all this time. I know we're going for lunch soon, and you'll be pleased to hear I'm going to stop talking soon. Really, patients have made all the difference to this research, and I think this is why I love doing the research that I do, because your experiences, all you need to know about is M&D, has been so key. Change is coming, and I think change both in care but also in new disease-modifying therapies. Some of the trials that are ongoing are really exciting and will change the disease, and the future's really bright, and the future's orange, because actually the MNDA have just been the most fantastic charity to support researchers like me, and just bringing you all together and giving me money is really, really helpful. So the things that you do in your fundraising, your donations, your volunteering is just so vital. And as I say, loads of people have been involved, and that's why I love doing it, because we get to work with all sorts of different researchers. There are some of them. And if anyone's local and wants to come back over the other side of the Pennines, where we have better weather, we have an open day on the 6th of July in Citran, and you're all welcome to come to that. And if you're on Twitter, then we should be making a bit more of a thing about it, actually. I think it's only just started, 6th of July. And you can just email us and book a place. And finally, just to remind you about the head-up collar, I'll be around in the lunch break if anyone wants to come and have a look at it. Thanks very much for listening.